Hey guys, I want to talk about the 7 best position 4 heroes to first pick right now. Recently I've been hearing supports say that it's hard to have impact in the game since you have to blind first pick every game, but in pubs I think there's certain heroes that lend themselves much better to being first picks. In this video I'm going to talk about the 7 top position 4s to first pick blind. I went with 7 instead of 5 or 10 because I think after number 7 there's a significant drop off, and I'm mainly going to be looking at how good they are in lane, because in pubs you're in a great spot if you come out of the lanes ahead.
Bow before me.
Grimstroke has a ton of great tools which are going to land him on this list, but he does have one major flaw keeping him from being any higher than number 7. Let's start with the good. You have great harass with Stroke of Fate, which also gives you a great slow and trading tool. Inkswell is one of the best early game abilities any position 4 has access to, and Phantom's Brace is an optional spell to level, which can give you kill potential on traditionally slippery carries like an anti-mage or a weaver. The limit to your aggression does come when you don't have a good position 3 to Inkswell. You always have the option of using it on yourself, but there are a ton of reasons why you don't want to be putting yourself in melee range against enemies as Grimstroke. On top of that, in more passive lanes, you don't have a ton to offer. You can slow enemies that are making aggressive moves and Inkswell you or your teammates as they run away. Past that, there's not a whole lot that you can do in slow lane matchups. Quick note before we go to the next hero, if you are enjoying this video or any of the others I put out, maybe consider subscribing. I'd really appreciate it.
It's true. I am Zeus.
This one pains me to do since I've always been pretty against Zeus as a support, but it's just undeniably strong right now. He's always had unmatched harass in the 4 role, but you were just so susceptible to dying that it wasn't really reliable in the slightest. But for some reason, they decided to give this hero one of the best early game ability spells, so there goes your main downside of playing this hero as a support. It doesn't really matter what your position 3 is, or what heroes you might be laning against. No one can really stop you from outputting an obnoxious amount of damage and making carries think twice about even coming up to the wave. With all that being said, this hero is still only number 6 on the list, so there must be some kind of drawbacks here. There are 2 things that I can really think of that are still hard for me to get over. Zeus is still an extremely mana dependent hero even as 4, and because of that you're gonna have to spend a good chunk of your early gold to keep your mana pool in decent shape. And then the second thing comes in when you come out of lane behind. Every other hero on this list can function very well whether they come out of the lane ahead, even, or behind. Position 4 Zeus with low gold and XP can quickly turn into a kind of useless hero. Yes, you will still have solid damage to add to your team, but without the money to finish some of these key items that you need, you're gonna have to get pretty close to do anything, and at that point you're just kind of a flashy target.
Snapfire!
When looking at bulky range supports, this one definitely tops the list. That fact, along with Scatterblast being a relatively cheap spell to use, it's very hard for opposing supports to trade with you without losing the vast majority of their HP. And this isn't just a hero that has good trade. Since you do have Cookie on top of this, a lot of your good harass can just turn into kills. Cookie is obviously best used when you have a melee hero that wants to gap close, but even if you don't have a hero that wants to jump in with Cookie to get in melee range, you still can Cookie yourself, and opposed to Grimstroke, whose Inkswell is kind of bad to put on yourself, Snapfire doesn't really care if she has to get too close to enemies, especially because that just lets you have big damage Scatterblast. And if for whatever reason you or your position 3 doesn't want to get cookied in at any point, you can still catch a lot of enemies off guard by cookieing lane creeps. Snap does prefer offensive lanes, but even in more passive lanes, there's still a lot that you can do on this hero. There's not really any matchups that completely shut Snap down in lane, so there isn't any downside to picking her first. No matter how ahead or behind you come out of lane, there's enough good Snap item builds to fit any scenario.
Say hello to my little friend.
A lot of this placement is just going to come down to how strong Bushwhack is. In lane, it's just so hard and even sometimes impossible to consistently stay away from trees that Bushwhack is basically always on the table. This is a fantastic harass and lockdown spell that is strong right away from just level 1. It obviously allows you to be very aggressive and directly set up kills, or even just harass down enemies to a point where they're killable later. But even in matchups where your position 3 doesn't want to or just can't be aggressive, this spell is one of the best at dissuading enemies from making aggressive moves. You also have long range and respectable auto attack damage. I think this is the number 1 hero for being able to get plugged into any lane and just do amazingly well. It works with any 3 and against any enemy comp. The one scenario that can be kind of awkward for this hero is if you're with a passive hero that does want some solo XP. If the lane starts going poorly early on in a lane like that, you're just going to get kicked out of lane, and there's not a whole lot that Hoodwink can do around the map at this point in the game. You're not nearly as good at roaming around and ganking until you're level 6. You much prefer to just sit in a lane and just kind of throw out bushwhacks and harass people down. So this can be kind of a niche scenario, but if you find it, you're going to be in kind of a rough spot pre-6.
I am vengeful spirit.
This might be the most surprising entry on the list, and it might just be here because I'm very biased for this hero, but I think Venge is phenomenal and underrated. Your base stats end up making you a bit tankier with a bit higher than average damage coming out of the gate, which makes you phenomenal at trading with most position 5s. You also have a low cooldown, good range stun with a great nuke tied to it. This is such a good kill, trading, and save tool. The main problem here is how much mana it takes in comparison to how often you want to use it. Because of this, you're often going to have to buy a ton of clarities, which is going to take a lot out of your early gold, or you're just going to run out of mana and kind of have to just sit around and not do a whole ton. Now, this is a big downside, but it's easy to play around if you just buy enough clarities to keep your mana pool up, and these clarities will often pay for themselves by how useful this spell actually is. This is also one of the position 4s that can easily still have huge impact in mid-game, even with a horrible lane. On top of that, if you do come out of lane with some extra money, you have a ton of item choices that can help you snowball into a hero with massive impact. Now that we're in the top 2, I don't think we're going to see any more surprises. Marcy is kind of just the quintessential 4 right now. You have 3 spells that are each lane winning on their own, compared to the other heroes on this list who all kind of focus on one really strong spell. In my opinion, there isn't any better lane stun than Dispose. It may not be the highest damage or the longest duration, but the fact that it also has this massive repositioning tool more than makes up for that. And if that wasn't enough, it's one of the few save spells in lane that can save a stunned ally by just throwing them out of danger. If this spell was tied to any other hero, it alone might land them on this list, but Marcy doesn't just stop there. Rebound, well, although much worse now that you can't jump off of enemies, makes Marcy such a terrifying hero to lane against. The most obvious reason for that is because it lets you gap close and get in range to use Dispose, but on top of that, it offers great AoE slow and a nuke for even more kill potential. It also gives a speed boost to whoever you jump off of, helping them run in or out of danger, and allows you to play wildly aggressive while still being only one button away from safety. Certain lanes can also take massive advantage of sidekick early on, in case for some reason you thought there was another thing that this hero needed to be even stronger. The only reason Marcy isn't number 1 right now is because there's just an even more broken hero out.
The Dawn Star rises.
This hero is just amazing in every regard right now. You can make up for any weakness your position 3 might have. If you need lockdown, you have a devastating AoE slow and an AoE stun. If you need damage, your base attack damage plus your great ability damage starting right away at level 1 will give you more than enough damage to solo kill almost any hero. If you need a body to frontline, you're a bulky strength hero. And if you just want to play passively, this hero can kind of just act like an ogre and harass, creep aggro, and trade. Outside of all of that, you just keep hitting amazing power spikes at pretty much every level. It doesn't matter if your position 3 wants to get solo XP for a bit, because since your spells are strong even at level 1, you're great at ganking as soon as you hit level 2. Most of the time, since you're so good at laning, you're going to come out of the lane very far ahead, which is great because there's so many snowball items that you can get on this hero to become a menace for the rest of the early game. But if somehow you come out of the lane far behind, you can still go a full utility route and be extremely useful to your team that way as well. Until this hero's early game gets nerfed severely, it's going to remain my number 1 vote for the best position 4 to first pick. On screen now are some honorable mentions. In the comments below, let me know what you think I missed, and while you're here, why don't you check out one of these other videos on screen.